Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The Geopolitical Insights. I'm Ramisa Rob, Geopolitical Insights Editor at the Daily Star. Joining me this morning is veteran diplomat of Bangladesh, Ambassador Tariq Karim. He served twice in Iran. He was there in 1969, and he was ambassador to Iran from 1991 to 1995 during the Islamic Republic led by now assassinated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Mr. Karim has also been Bangladesh ambassador to the US. Needless to say, his insights today are incredibly important for us to understand Iran today. Now, thank you, Ambassador Karim, for joining us today. We want to understand more of Iran from you. So, should we start with your experience and what you see Iran as today?
Thank you very much, Ramisa, and thank you at the Daily Star for having me on board for this special program.
Of course, it's our pleasure. So I wanted to start with asking you about how we have come to this Iran that we are seeing today and understanding more about the country itself, because I think there's a gap in understanding, and you were there for a while.
Okay, I think number one, we as human beings and individuals, we all have a way of forming our opinions from what we see and what we hear and what we read and etc. and our interactions. And you have to understand why I will have the opinions or express the opinions I have. It's been a fundamental belief with me that I take it from the point that the nation is a collection of individuals. Okay? And like individuals, nation and their societal behavior have their history and culture embedded in their genes. And this is something which I imbibed and took to heart when I was studying literature, and one of my favorites was T.S. Eliot, who's known more for his poetry, but there's an essay which was an outstanding piece of work by him. And that stuck with me throughout my life. I studied it in 1967 or 60, probably 1964 or 65. It's called Tradition and the Individual Talent. Now, he was writing as a literary critic, okay? He was writing in the process of literature, and he says, everything that an author or a creative writer has embedded in him all the creative writing of his ancestors which have come down to him. We are like blotting papers. We absorb it. It's in our minds. It gets in our mindset. It reshapes the way we look at things and understand things. And I basically look at history similarly, that a people cannot go against the grain of their historical development. And that is how I view Iran or any country that I try to analyze, even my own country. And so that's where I come from. Now, I had to study Iranian history deeply in my very first posting in 1969 when I was there, and that was the first task the ambassador gave. When he told me that to understand the country, its people, the nation, and everything, you have to understand its history. And what I discovered in that deep dive into that Iranian history that I date from textbooks written by foreigners as well as textbooks written by Iranian is that Iranian has a continuous history for about 5,000 years. They have been ruled during this 5,000 years, this from 3,500 BC or around that period. They have been ruled by only 3 indigenous Persian dynasties. But everyone else who came, they were interlopers, they were conquerors, they were invaders. And they would come and stay from anywhere ranging from several decades to several centuries. But what the Iranians would do is they would just embrace them, Persianize them. And when they released them, the conquerors would go back Persianized. Iranians got something from the invaders in the sense that they were through a process of infusion, something was added to the Iranian culture. But they did not lose their culture nor the sense of history. The was conquered and went back. So that's number one, that there's a continuity. The Iranians are Persians first. And it is the Persianness that you have to understand. And in a sense, so they had the first world empire was the Achaemenid Empire. And then after the Achaemenid Empire, they had the Greeks who came, Alexander conquered, but then Alexander became Persianized. He had several concubines, he had children by them. And I don't know what would have happened if he had lived beyond the 32 years of his life, but he died early. His generals took over. So there was a period of Greek rule. Then the Iranians reasserted themselves after a period. And the next Iranian dynasty was the Sassanid, the Sasanian Empire. That's one of the golden age of Iran. When after the Achaemenids, the Sassanians, that's when they had a language, the Persian language was evolving. The language, one of the Middle Persian language was known as Pahlavi. And that name was taken many centuries later when the Shahanshah or the present Shah or pretender to the throne, his grandfather assumed the name on assuming the throne. So that is the continuity. And in a sense, Iranians, if you have seen pictures of the Iranian women wearing the huge burqas, that was what they used to wear after the Islamic regime came. They called it the chador. It was a huge black chador from the head. It would cover the entire body and it would be flowing. And a metaphor I thought of was that it's like the chador that Iran has as a nation. The invader comes, they embrace the invader in the chador. Yeah, they get, in the process, they get pummeled a lot. But when they release it, the invader is Persianized. So that is succession of dynasties until the Pahlavis. In between, well, not in between, but dynasties ended and monarchies ended. They had 4 revolutions. And these 4 revolutions were basically from 1905, 1925. There was one in 1950, 51, 1979. And each revolution, in a sense, has shaped their history going forward, has reshaped their Persianness, but strengthened their Persianness every time it comes. Now, with the Arab conquest, they had Arabic Persian dynasties ruling them. And the greatest of the Persian, Arabized or Arabic Persian dynasties were the Safavids. So that was the third great period of flourishing of Iranian or Persian culture. But this is now an Islamized Persian culture. And it was during this time that they adopted the Shiite religion. So that is another imposition on the Persian. It is another reshaping of the Persian culture. And these are the factors which have brought Iran to where it is today and to how it looks in the world today. So that is a very brief history of what is it that we are dealing with in order to enable us to understand it.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Karim. So I wanted to ask you, what does this history that you said that's so interesting of how Iran came about to what it is today, what does it teach us about the Iranian people today and as a nation?
Resilience. That's the one word which strikes to my mind, resilience. Their Persianness, their sense of history, historical legacy inbuilt in them, which they will never abandon. And as you know, I was there twice. I was first as a junior diplomat during the days of the Shah, when they were glorifying basically the Achaemenid period, the pre-Islamic period. Mm-hmm. And then I was there during the days of the mullahs, when they were basically prioritizing their Shiite Islam that they adhered to. Okay. And so when there's a regime change of that nature, the Shiite Islam tried to dominate the Persianness. That happened, started from 79 when the revolution took place. But when I went there in 91, I arrived there just a few days before they have the last Wednesday of the Iranian year. The Iranians still follow the ancient Zoroastrian calendar. Remember that. I mean, this is something they have not abandoned. For the Iranians, many of the ancient Zoroastrian customs and festivals, after Islam came, they just gave it a new meaning. Like when Islam came to Bengal, many of the cultural matrix that was there in the matrix before Islamic Bengal, the Sufis taught us to accept that matrix. They did not change that matrix. They just took the culture, left it as it is, but they gave it a new depth, a new meaning, a new dimension in the light of the new religion that they're teaching us. And the Iranians did exactly the same thing. Okay, so on that last Wednesday of the, I had just landed 2 or 3 days earlier. I asked my driver, it's a national holiday. It's called Akhri Chaharshanbe. Chaharshanbe in Persian means Wednesday. Akhri in Persian is the last Wednesday of the Iranian year. And I said, drive me around. Now, the reason I asked him to do that is because that is the day when every Iranian in a family or in a community, they come out on the streets in the center of the community, they light a bonfire and they jump across this. That was an ancient Zoroastrian custom. The fire is a purifying spirit. And the symbolism was they would jump across it, put their misfortunes and misdeeds of the past year behind them, and go forward to the new year after having renewed themselves. So I wanted to see if that was still there, because the holiday was still there. That is what intrigued me. It was an Islamic regime, okay, but they're observing this as a national holiday. So I drove around the streets, even to the area where I had lived previously as a third and second sector. And I saw these bonfires lit everywhere in every community. So I asked the driver, Aghay Dashti, how is it that you still practice that? The Iranian regime, the mullahs did not stop it? And his answer was very typical. He said, sir, every time the mullahs tried to stop this, we would do it more. So that gives you an inclination, what I was saying, that it is so deeply imbued in their culture. It is part of the way of life. They are not going to give it up. The second indication I got, which strengthens this feeling, he was going to have a daughter or a child very soon. He knew that it was going to be a daughter. And he had a son already. And his son had a very Arabic, Muslim, Islamic name. So I just asked him out of curiosity, oh, very good, you're going to have a daughter, what are you going to name? And he said a name which was very, very Persian. Nothing to do with the Arabized names that many of the Muslim world has. So I said, you're going to name him, your child this Persian name? Sir, nowadays, every Iranian having a child wants to name his child an Iranian name. A Persian name, not Iranian. He's saying Persian. Every time he says this Persian. So that's the way these people are. You cannot change that thinking. You cannot take it out of their minds. And that's the way they approach. So now, why are they behaving or reacting the way it is? Again, you look at history, the way conquerors came, they were conquered. They were overrun. Conquerors came, destroyed, burned, pillaged, raped, everything. Okay? The Iranians just like the metaphor of the willow tree and the oak tree. The oak tree falls when there's a big stone. The willow bends over, let the wind pass over it, and then straightens up. That, I think, typifies the Iranian culture. So they allowed their conquerors to come because they could not keep the conqueror out. But the conqueror left conquered. Okay. And so they assimilated whatever is coming. They will not. So in that sense, if you ask me, where do you think what is going to happen? Iranians are not going to surrender. They will keep fighting as they fought previous invaders. Okay. Number two, why do you think they have this faith coming in? Is the Shiite religion, which is they have. Shias are basically less about 20% of the total global population. Iran has a population of about 93 plus million. 60% of this population is Shiite. Then the rest are spread along Iraq and the bordering areas, Jordan, Egypt, elsewhere. Iraq's population, incidentally, is also 50% of the total population. Now, there's a big difference, and perhaps we can talk about this in greater details later on. In the Shiite culture, martyrdom is very central to their belief, and it is derived from the legend of the martyrdom of Hazrat Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet. And that martyrdom occurred on the 10th day of the first month of the Muslim calendar, which everybody known as Ashura. And Ashura is a day celebrated with great religious fervor across the Shiite world. But I grew up as a Muslim. My father was a Muslim, but our tradition was a Sufi Muslim tradition, as was in those days. We respected the Shiite culture. So there was a harmonious coexistence between Sunnis and Shias up to a certain point, until the more, how shall I call it, the harder versions, the more fundamental versions of Islam started coming in. Now, the Iranians have not succumbed to that other fundamentalism, although Iranians are also accused by many, particularly the Western media, that they are also fundamentalists. But their fundamentalism is from the fact that this is my belief. How dare you come and try and change my belief? This I have believed in from the 8th century or 9th century when we got this. And this we will never abandon. So they are a small minority. Well, they are a huge minority in the Muslim community. But within Iran, if after 93 million people, 60% are Shias, then that superimposes itself. But underlying that superimposition is everyone. The periphery of Iran is non-Persian. There are Arabs, there are Kurds, there are Azeris, there are Baluchis. They are all around Iran. Okay, but they are Persians before they are Arabs, Kurds, Azeris, or Baluchis. Their language is Persian. The communication is Persian. So they have their own language, but this is Persian. The two coexist. And so when an invader strikes them, they close ranks. Some of them, yes, they have internally in the internal politics, they have fractions, they have schisms. Regimes can become unpopular, there will be uprisings. But if an external factor, an external marauder comes in, they close ranks. And I think that is what I'm seeing right now.
More of what you're seeing right now in terms of them closing ranks. And also, I've just learned and unlearned a lot of things about misconceptions about Iran that I think existed during my formative years in the US. So, do those misconceptions drive the war?
Sorry, do these misconceptions?
Do misconceptions drive US actions in the war?
I couldn't, you broke up when we were talking.
Oh, no, I meant to misconceptions in the US, this anti-Iran hysteria about and Iran's the different kind of fundamentalism that exists.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Uh, when we are discussing the 79 revolution, and I will discuss the different revolutions as they came. Perhaps we can do that as a chapter. But this particular question, the U.S. perception of Iran basically is somehow stuck in 79 and the overthrow of the Shah's regime. Okay. And
Mhm.
at that time, the US has invested heavily in propping up the Shah's regime. And it happened at a time when the Western world, Western powers were retreating. It started from 1970 when I was in Iran at the time. The, if you have heard go back to the history books, you'll read about a time called the British withdrawal from east of Suez. It happened, it started, they contemplated this from 69. It happened in 70 when the UAE was formed, because basically the British as empire had collapsed. They had finished the resources. The Americans were emerging, but they had not become the great global power that they had aspirations, but they had not reached their place. And giving up, moving east of Suez means that the British were withdrawing. The British power was extended and kept by their having garrisons all over their empire. And the garrisons were marked, the core of the garrison was British, but they would hire locals to expand the local armies to keep control over the territories they had colonized. Now, when they are leaving, this is going to be a vacuum. And the British and the Americans basically said, hey, you can't leave that place vacuum. Somebody is going to fill it in. Where will our interest go? And basically their interest is hydrocarbon reserves at that time. And Iran was at that time leading. Now others have come. Iran is not number one, it is number three. But at that time, Iran was known to have the biggest deposits of hydrocarbon, and they needed the hydrocarbons. Remember what happened after World War II had flattened Western civilization in a sense. How did the Europeans get together? By first arriving at two agreements. The European coal and steel community was formed because they needed the energy to drive the industrial revolution. And then Euratom was formed, the peaceful use of atomic energy for generating power. They needed energy. Without energy, a nation cannot develop. So coal and steel is the raw material you use, and coal is what drives the engines that will enable you to use that steel. So it was the same when oil and gas were discovered in the Arabian Peninsula to begin with. And that is where World War I comes in later on, when the British tried to split up the Ottoman Empire to take control of the Arab oil fields. And so that is a difference. That's a part of the parallel history, which is the larger macro history. I don't want to go into that because then we'll be digressing a lot. Okay. But basically, they said, okay, here's the power. Iran was a great power to begin with. Let us build up Iran. And in 71, in 1970, I was there. The Shah was celebrating the great 2500th anniversary of the Iranian monarchy. And basically, he was claiming lineage from the time of the monarchies of the Achaemenids. He was going back to the Achaemenid periods of Cyrus and Darius, Cyrus the Great, who founded the empire in Persepolis. And one thing, it is a symbolic thing. Recently, in the Iranian National Day reception, they showed a clip, and the first part of the clip, over a minute long, minute and a half, and a minute and a half on a clip is a long time in a short clip, right? It was about Persepolis. The same murals and everything that I had seen when I first visited it in 69 and revisited in the 90s. They have preserved this immaculately. There it shows a frieze all around how the Persian king is receiving the tributary kings, the vassals kings, who come to pay obedience to him, give him gifts, and assure him of his of the fealty to him. Now, this I saw when I went back at the time of the mullahs. I went to Persepolis again. There were mullahs there with the children saying, "This was Iran, never forget it." And now they still project it. So that they have become Islamic. Okay? The Achaemenids were not Islamic. They were not even Zoroastrians. They had their own pantheon of gods. But they were the first world empire. That was the greatest empire that recorded history has. And they will not let the young generations, generation after generation, forget that. So that gives them the inner zeal that you will come and conquer. Let's see whether you can conquer. Let's see how long we will remain conquered. That is the spirit with which they've approached this.
Is critically important geopolitical.
Let me complete that. The American are fixated on 79. 79 is when the Shah was overthrown. And when the Shah was overthrown, the young revolutionaries occupied the American embassy. And from there comes in the American attitude towards Iran, it's the hostage crisis of 1979, which defines the American thinking. And when I was posted in America, I had left the Foreign Service. I was an academic, and I used to have talk with American scholars, one of whom incidentally was posted. He was an Iranian expert, posted in Iran the same time I was in the 60s, but he was posted in Shiraz. And I said, look, 79 was not the beginning of something. It was the culmination of something. And if you can put that in context, you'll probably find the Iranians becoming your best friends because they want to be like you in terms of development and achievements. And he told me privately, Tariq, I agree with you, but it just ain't going to happen with our with our politics.
So its resistance is inbuilt in the nation. And so I wanted to understand how externally as well did Iran become this geopolitically important player?
How? What? Didn't get the question.
How did Iran become this geopolitically important player externally?
What gives it the geopolitical importance?
Yes.
Well, geolocation. Look at the map of Iran, and it would perhaps be helpful for you when you have not Iran in the world, but Iran in that Middle East and Persian Gulf region, and you see that where is all the oil located? I've given you one slide of where the global oil locations are. And you'll see most of the oil locations are, Iran is one of them. Then there are the Arab, Saudi Arabia, there are the Gulf states and others, they have it. And then the next one is in Latin America, in Venezuela. Okay. Now, when you look at this and look at where the concentration of oil is, and then look who the users of oil are, where they are. Now, I've also given a breakdown. There's one graph which shows who's using oil, how much dependence they have. All the oil is inside the Persian Gulf region, the bulk of it, which is not outside the Asian continent. Okay, and that whether it's Saudi Arabia has their refineries on the coast. They have a coastal belt, but They have refineries inside also. They use the Persian Gulf to come through the Straits of Hormuz into the Indian Ocean, then go wherever they go. That's what the gas is also. The Iran has the third largest deposit of gas, I think third or second largest deposit of gas in the world after Russia, and the third largest deposit of oil after Venezuela and Russia and then Iran. Who are the consumers of this oil? 70%, 60 to 70% is used by Japan, 50% to China, 60% by Korea. The Indians import about 4 million barrels. Okay, so you look at the consumption pattern. All of this oil has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is about 32 miles wide. And you look at that map, and Iran controls the northern part of the Strait of Hormuz and Oman the other side. And Iran owns an island. There are 3 islands there, Keshem Island, then Abu Musa and Tum Islands. Iran occupied these in 1970 during the days of the Shah. They were disputed. There were other Arab Gulf states, but Iran was able to assert itself and say, no, these are ours and then we are here. Why did they do that? That gives them the control over passage of whether you have hydrocarbons or other industrialized finished material going out from the Gulf area to the rest. So it's a choke point. It is the most important choke point which is serving the interest of several powers, particularly the rising Eastern powers. So that is what gives its importance. Why is it of concern to the Americans? Because who is America's main challenger now? Is China. Who is America's number 2 challenger now? It's Russia. And Russia and China are together on one side, but America is on the other. So now you're beginning to figure out where this geopolitical adversity relation comes in and how Iran becomes so important. And of course, the other thing is that Iran is Shiite. The other Muslims over there are largely Sunni dominated, except Bahrain. Bahrain, the majority, the population are Shiites, the rulers are Sunnis. And that's what gives Saudi Arabia an affinity with the rulers in Bahrain. Now, what it is doing, this war is doing by attrition. Iran's goal is very simple. I read a piece of paper shared by an Iranian think tank. The bottom line is, you do not guarantee our security, we will raise the security cost for the rest of the world. And when they say security cost, that security cost comes down to dependence on hydrocarbons. And why are hydrocarbons important? They are becoming increasingly important now, particularly in the last few years, because our transition to clean energy has not been as dramatic as many had wanted it to be or hoped to be. And of course, America is leading the charge, because when President Trump says, drill, baby, drill, he's going back to hydrocarbons. So, that is another part of the global struggle to redefine your energy security. Nuclear energy is there, but nuclear energy still doesn't fill the gap, because many of these smaller countries cannot afford nuclear energy. And one of the reasons why Iran wanted the development of its nuclear resources was it wants to have energy. It doesn't want to be always dependent on its oil. Even the Arabs, where Saudi Arabia was planning that I can't depend on my hydrocarbons forever. So they are diversifying their economy. But there are many countries who still depend on it.
I wanted to ask which countries depend on hydrocarbon and how does that energy dynamic play into this war? Would you be able to explain that?
Well, I think I mentioned that who's importing the maximum, whose imports are maximum affected by the closure of the Hormuz.
Yes.
China,
China,
Japan,
Korea.
Korea, uh, the East Asian countries largely. Japan, I think it's 70%. It goes from the Gulf region, a large part of it from Iran. China, it's about 50%, large part of it from Iran. Although China has started diversifying its sources, so it gets it from Central Asia and elsewhere also. It started buying up oil fields 10, 15 years ago. Buying up meaning leasing oil fields for sole use by them. So they were thinking in advance. All right. So dependent situation can come. How does it come? It means you become dependent on something or the other that you need, and if you don't have it, you become dependent on the source from where you can get it. So it's both. The geopolitics comes in from the geolocation of where the sources are from where you have to acquire it, and how it is transported from there. Most of it from the Persian Gulf, it still has to come over the waterways. It is the cheapest form of bulk transportation, although I think it is still subject to more data coming in. The Chinese have been putting in place a trans-Asian rail line circumventing the sea route across China, across Russia, across Central Asia to Iran. Okay. So if that happens, it's going to change our concept of the domination of the sea lanes totally, because you're bypassing the conventional sea lanes. Why is the Indo-Pacific so important in today's context? Because until the 70s, the focus was on the Atlantic Ocean and on the European continent more. It shifted to Asia and the Indian Ocean only from the 70s onward. And then Indo-Pacific comes in because Pacific countries, whether on the western shores of the Pacific or the eastern shores, are dependent on a lot of things coming in from the Asian continent, basically from West Asia. So the sea lanes become important. The American doctrine on control of the sea lanes essentially is derived from the earlier British experience of history. It was Admiral Mahan of the American Navy. He was studying at the War College in UK, and he is the first one who posited that it's the control of the sea lanes which made Britain the most powerful European, although Britain is not part of the mainland Europe, the most powerful colonial power. They basically ruled all the oceans. And from there comes all these concepts of the Monroe Doctrine, keeping the sea lanes open, having the Navy spread all across the world so that nobody can choke off the American supplies to what they need to keep America being great.
Think about the chances of civil
Did you get
unrest.
that?
Yes, yes, I got
Please.
the entire question. So to come off what makes America great and this idea of the Monroe Doctrine, which is now people say it's Donroe with Donald Trump doctrine. What is
Mm.
your take on that?
Okay, the basically now as you see it, I mean, we were in a unipolar world after the breakup of the Soviet Empire. That is after in the 90s, the beginning of the 90s, when the Gorbachev and the Americans sat down and uh, a lot of things started happening. The Soviet Union broke up. The primacy of the Soviet Union as the challenger to the American empire was shattered. Berlin was united. Uh, and in a sense, some of the conflicts which are happening now are a follow-up of that. Because one of the things that, I mean, you don't have to take it from me. Listen to some of the American scholars who have been saying that at that time when the Americans and the Russians or the Soviets at that time, they were still not Russia. They're just on the verge of becoming a Russian Federation from Soviet Union. When they did a deal, part of the commitment was that NATO, Warsaw Pact would have to be disbanded. NATO would also perhaps along, that was not written anywhere, would follow if the Warsaw Pact did that. And NATO expansion, even if NATO existed, would not go an inch forward. But basically, NATO has been expanding inexorably until they came to Ukraine, when Ukraine is going to become part of NATO and part of the European Union. And that's when Russia said, you are sitting on my backyard. And so why is Russia gets concerned? The same reason why the Americans got concerned when the Soviets installed missiles on Cuba. And the Americans said, this is not acceptable. We will not have you station your missiles and launching pads in Cuba, which is right inside a back door. So it's the same sort of reasoning being used by others in a different context. All right. So Domino doctrine is basically now, I think the Americans understand that China has emerged, is the most serious contender to its unipolar status. And so it's becoming more and more a multipolar world. Russia has been weakened somewhat with its long war with Ukraine, but Russia is still standing strong and still the most powerful power in the European area. So I think what is emerging as I see it is still not totally solidified. America wants complete control of the Americas. Okay. China is a strength. It will keep pushing, prodding, but it will not, I don't think it's going to go into a war with China. And it wants to, Russia will probably be the dominant European power to come. So you'll have maybe 3 centers or 3.5 centers coming up. And in that context, the Domino doctrine, as it is called by people or observers everywhere, is basically America expanding the scope of the Monroe Doctrine. But it is to insulate the American hemisphere. So, you have the Eastern and Western hemispheres. Now, the Western hemisphere, you can subdivide it as the American hemisphere. And then Russia is trying to expand into Ukraine. It will probably take control of Odessa. Then it will have control of the waters. And then probably there will be a European hemisphere where Western Europe and others will have to figure out how they coexist with the Russians. And then there will be the Eastern hemisphere. Well, China is still top gun. It's probably the top gun. It's the only country which has not directly entered the war, the current war. It is not depleting its resources. It is actually conserving and building up. And probably the Iranians are able to continue because they have, and this is something which goes back when I was posted in China before I went to Iran as ambassador. I was DCM in China from 1988 November until 1991 November, and then I went to Iran as ambassador. And I saw how close relationships had been developed between Iran and China, Iran and North Korea. So Iran got most of its hardware technology in long-reach destructive power from China and from North Korea. And probably because China and Iran have a symbiotic relationship in the Chinese acquisition of hydrocarbons from the Iranians, they will continue helping the Iranians. And according to some reports I've read or heard, and some of these are by American strategic thinkers in the last couple of days. Iranians are probably getting satellite feeds of exact coordinates of targets that they're interested in. Maybe some from the Chinese, and certainly some from the Russians, insofar as the western side of Iran is concerned.
Do you think this axis will be strengthened? This axis, this triangular axis between Iran, Russia, and China will be strengthened from this war?
I think so, yes. But I think China, even in the First World Gulf War. Now remember, you asked. I mean, I think one of the implications of the question was how long can Iran keep fighting? Take the first Gulf War. What happened then? How did it start? When did it start? It started in 80. The revolution is just behind them. They're consolidating. They're still in the process where they have a coalition, a broad coalition of a national government. And it was not just the mullahs in power. There were people from the Communist Party on the left to the mullahs on the right with centrists. There was a centrist who was the president of Iran, of the interim national government. Okay, when Iraq attacked Iran, and according to some reports, it was the U.S. ambassador in Iraq or Kuwait who basically told the Iraqis that Iran is at its weakest. You can redress some of the wrongs you feel Iran did to you, mainly on the Shatt al-Arab waterways, and that there's a history to that, because that's the outlet from coming in from the Iraqi side across Jordan, Transjordan, etc., into the Persian Gulf. And normally, the boundary on the waterways and the what is called the Thalweg, the median line. But the Shah, with the backing of the Americans and the Western powers, had forced Iraq to have it on the eastern side of the river, in fact, controlling the entire river. And the Iraqis had always resented that. And so when Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, the calculation was that, there's a new regime, the army might not be loyal to the regime, and they are still squabbling amongst themselves as to who will be top gun in the interim government. So they are fragmented, they are somewhat disoriented. You attack them and revise that agreement. And well, what happened? Iran fought for 8 years. And it was not just the Iraqis, it was Iraqis with Western money, Western guns, and it was the Western powers joining in with them, and it was Arab money funding them. So in a sense, the Iranians fought with the entire world against them, trying to bring that regime down. And at the end of 8 years, they were still standing tall. That is the staying power. That is what I meant, that sense of history, that you cannot wipe me out. I'm indestructible. That is when the entire nation coalesced around. They took a lot of, hits. They suffered a lot. Actually, they would have been better off if they had stopped the war after 4 or 5 years. But they just would not surrender. They said, no, we were attacked upon. We are fighting a just war. We will continue fighting. And in the end, the others got tired and a peace was brokered. So this time, if my understanding of how the Iranians think and behave is correct, Yemen is mentally prepared. The Iranians are mentally prepared. We will continue until the last man, woman, and child is standing. Then you will have the wasteland. You can come and walk over it.
Thank you so much for that answer.
And of course, one of the consequences of this war is now people have started screaming. Okay, the Arabs, the Gulf nations are really hurting. They have had to force down some of their production capacities, some of the refineries. Their shipments are under attack. And despite whatever all the threats the Iranians have received, they are maintaining a sort of blockade on passage of ships across the Persian Gulf, across the Strait of Hormuz. That is the choke point. And if they can't get out from the Persian Gulf into the Indian Ocean, those ships are not going anywhere. Okay, they are stuck there. And similarly, the Arab nations, the Gulf nations, it's not just oil. Now they are all flourishing economies. They have manufacturing bases. They have Western and other investments. They produce goods. They need raw material for the production of those goods. They don't have those raw materials. The manufacturing is done with other things. They complete it. In a sense, it's a sort of revised colonialism because they are getting things from other things and selling it back to others. They are a transit point for much of the trade happening. Uh, so they are hurting economically. It's not just the oil and gas that is stopped. They are in economic infrastructure. And as I mentioned earlier, the Saudis were thinking that we have to diversify. They were going to build a completely new Saudi Arabia in addition to what exists through developing manufacturing bases, which would, of course, now it has implications for countries like ours. Where do our surplus manpower go? To countries like this. So if those countries develop, they will need more manpower. And if our manpower goes, we get more foreign exchange back. We get more employment back where we can't give employment for ourselves. And we are not the only one doing it. A lot of other Asian countries are in the same boat. So basically what the Iranians are saying is, you are hurting us, we will hurt you. Now, is it in your interest to continue hurting us, to hurt yourself? Or is it in your interest to try and tell the people who are attacking us to stop attacking us?
Do you think that the other Gulf nations are going to are giving pressure to Trump to have an exit plan from this war?
They have been. They never wanted this war to start. They had been telling Trump much earlier. This was a war basically which was preemptively started by Netanyahu. And unfortunately, Mr. Marco Rubio let the cat out of the bag when he said that, we had information that Netanyahu was going to launch a strike. And so we thought that strike would have stirred up the Iranians who started hitting everyone around. So we thought, let us see the Iranian capacity to do that. And so it will not end. Well, the calculation was flawed. The premise was flawed. But yes, Netanyahu forced the Americans to do the first strike, and he followed through. Okay. So now they're stuck in this. I think one of the calculations was you take the head off, decapitate, and the body will not function. That was done. That was done in Venezuela. Well, they decapitated, but the regime did not collapse. The assumption was that hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands people will pour out because they were all fed up with the regime. Well, there was some pouring out, but then the pouring out was more to consolidate around the regime. Okay, I don't like this person ruling me, but I don't like you more for attacking me. This is an attack not just to the regime, this is an attack on my land, on me. Okay, so that is where the consolidation comes in. The Persianness comes first. Then they are whatever they are.
The impact on other countries such as Bangladesh. Can you explain from your take on that?
I missed I just heard Bangladesh. What is it before you? So repeat the sentence.
Can you explain what the effect has been on countries like Bangladesh and what your understanding is of a protracted?
Well, number one, any country needs energy security to underpin its grand development programs. The Industrial Revolution could not have taken the Western world or the European countries to where it did without the development of the steam engine and the harnessing of coal to producing steam to drive engines. All right, the locomotives were steam driven before they became diesel driven or elsewhere. Now, our number one weakness is we do not have energy security. If we do not have energy security, we cannot attract investments to come in to set up industries and develop a manufacturing base which will provide employments and jobs. And yes, we are producing. And number three, of course, there are other things, but this is not the forum in which to go through it. And I think, unfortunately, and I've been saying this for the last 5, 6, 7 years, that why have we made ourselves so dependent on our source of energy, our source of hydrocarbons coming to the west of us, that is coming from the Persian Gulf and elsewhere, and not from within the Bay of Bengal, which is our own domain. The Persian Gulf, there are areas in the Indian Ocean which are contested areas. And right now, the most hotly contested in the Persian Gulf area. And I said, we have hydrocarbon resources in the Bay of Bengal. We have hydrocarbon resources in the Andaman Sea area. We have hydrocarbon resources to countries east of us, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, all of them have hydrocarbons. Why have we not had agreements with these countries? Why have we not looked east, sent the best diplomats there, stepped up? Because we became so totally one item dependent for our export market and for economy to develop. It was America and Europe and our garments. I mean, people have been telling us, economists have been telling Bangladesh, and I have been telling it when I was ambassador to America for a very short period. That was my shortest assignment because I was a political appointee at the time. Okay. And the Americans said, look, you are going to lose your GSP and your duty-free access sooner than you think. Do what the Africans are doing. The AGOA Accord with America was actually signed, and I was invited. I was the only South Asian invited there to the ceremony at the White House. All the African Caribbean countries were there signing an agreement with America. We did not diversify. We stuck to garments. And of course, when you stick to one area, you become dependent on that area. So our economy has become largely dependent. We have become a hostage to that. Maybe we'll start thinking of diversifying now. And because we are dependent, the garment industry needs a huge input in hydrocarbons coming in. They need diesel to run the generators because only then, because we can't provide electricity 24 hours, they have to run the generators to keep the factories running. The smaller factories are shutting down. Brunei, we had an agreement with Brunei. Many, many years ago, it was signed. Okay. But it was never activated. Brunei offered after COVID, when we started feeling the pinch, and particularly after the Ukraine war started and our supplies became hostage, Brunei renewed that MOU with us. But then I was told those who import or take the decisions to import are not going forward to Brunei. They are sticking to the traditional sources in the Gulf areas. And now, of course, we are hostage to that. So we might be able to get from others, but it will depend on America agreeing to waive the sanctions on Russian oil coming to us. It has done for India. I don't know whether it will do it for us. Or we may have to buy from faraway countries. The distance will be longer, the shipping will be longer, so cost will also be longer. That will translate into the ability of our garment industry to be competitive. These things are all tied one to the other. You can't think in terms of isolation. And I see our basic problem in governance is we all think in silos. What you do in one field has a chain backward and forward, but there is no consultation in the different parts of the links that go backward or forward. And that has been a major flaw. And it's not just us. In us, perhaps it's more magnified. I've seen this in the rest of South Asia, at least certainly I've seen this in great extent to India, where I served, and I've seen this in other countries.
Solve this problem? If it's, and how long, in the last 18 months of the LDC graduation as well, there was a one heard about dissension between the government and the private sector. So how can we have a better coordination?
There has to be more meaningful discussions, not just discussions which go on the air for the government and the private sector have to work closely. I think the private sector has to understand, and the government has to perhaps nudge them and help them. Diversification is not going to come on its own. But I've been saying for the last several years that perhaps tomorrow or day after or the day after, somebody is going to come up and become the next Bangladesh in offering cheap garments to the rest of the world. There were countries before Bangladesh who were doing the same. There was China, there was Vietnam, there was even India. But when those countries' own economies start developing, the standard of living starts going up. When the standard of living starts going up, the cost of living also, there are ancillary factors coming. Now, I'm no economist, but I understand what politics and economics mean. Okay. And unfortunately, what happened is that our politics also became hostage to our industries. And there was what is our industry? Basically, it's the garment industry. They dictated to the government what should happen. So even where the oil should be coming from is dictated by people linked with that. And they were also part of the government by extension. Diversification in sourcing could not happen, and diversification and industrialization also did not happen. You become comfortable, our people become comfortable. You look at our own economic development. After partition in 1947, East Pakistan's economy was overwhelmingly dependent on the foreign exchange earned by jute. And where was the jute? All in East Pakistan. How much of the foreign exchange came from jute? 80% of total foreign exchange revenues earned by Pakistan came from jute from East Pakistan. Where did the grouse with West Pakistan start? Within Bengalis? That you are taking 80% of the 80% foreign exchange we earn and you are reinvesting in Pakistan. You're treating us like a colony. That's where the economic difference. So you had the cultural difference with the language. Now you have increasingly economic dependence coming in. And then, of course, you become a political hostage. These things came together to, say, we cannot continue. Islam cannot be the binding factor. We have Bengalis as culturally, as a nation. There are 1,200 miles of hostile territory. We have to develop on our own. We can be friends, but that didn't work. So, unfortunately, jute ran out of steam in the global market around early 60s, mid 60s, sometimes around then. And we had to scramble around because the jute market, the jute industry, the largest jute industry was in East Pakistan. We fed the jute industries elsewhere. We had to scramble around, find something. So went into frozen. Yeah, tea was always there. Tea was a constant, but tea also had competition. So tea is still a major component, but it's not one of the major, outstandingly major components of our export market. The tea growers almost everywhere around us, and they're all competing. So initially our tea was used only for blending. Now we are doing some blending ourselves and sending out finished products. When we ran out of steam from jute, we switched to frozen fish, frozen food export, basically fish. And then from frozen fish, suddenly the government came in, and it was an interesting story. Some Bangladeshis had gone to Korea, the Koreans invested, and then they found, hey, this is a good way to go. We can make our clothes so cheap. So we became basically darzis to the world, tailors to the entire world. We were stitching things cheaper. We were getting the raw material from everyone else because we were not growing much of the cotton ourselves. We were not making the yarn ourselves. So all these things started developing from there. Okay. And then we became the cheapest source, or one of the cheapest now. Even that, I think some other countries are giving us a good run for the money. Manufacturers of clothes than the rest of the world, particularly most of Europe and most of America. Now, what happens when we are outperformed or outbid in the garment industry? Do we have fallback to fall on? We have not yet diversified that others can take over to the extent that others can take over. And that is where I see the big mistake. I think this Gulf War is really going to drive that.
So
our problem is, and this is a lesson I learned when I was doing my postgraduate. When I went to do my postgraduate in my middle-aged years. Okay, governments have never think in an anticipatory manner. We don't know what anticipatory thinking is. Governments typically think in 5-year, 10-year segments. That's all. The only other country which doesn't do that is China. When I was in China, I found out the smallest chunk of planning period that they had in mind was 50 years. So they planned for 50 years and 100 years. Government thinks I'm going to come in through an election. If I stay 5 years, I have to do this in 5 years. And so they do that. The political parties who come in do that partly for self-aggrandizement, partly for agenda which doesn't exist beyond 5 years. Then we had our political schisms. So one party would come in, it's a zero-sum game. The other party would say, oh, you did all that nonsense, I'm going to change it. So even if the previous government has done something good to build on, you jettison that, you start something again. So every time we start the whole process all over again. It helps the parties, it helps some leaders, it doesn't help the nation. So we have to move away from this fragmented mindset, this fragmented planning paradigm that we have adopted, the thinking in silos and working in silos. I mean, you talk of climate change. We are a delta, right? What is the delta? The delta is because of the rivers. Okay, the rivers feed the forest feeds everything else. Your agriculture comes from the water sources, etc. Now, you have one ministry dealing with water, you have one ministry dealing with agriculture, you have one ministry dealing with food. All these are interlinked. Where do we coordinate? I've been to the hill tracts and other areas. Somebody is building a road through the forest, and the forest says, hey, you did not take permission from me. Why? Because the two ministries have not talked to each other. The two departments have not talked. Ministry talking is at the micro level. Even the local departments don't talk to each other. So unless we do that, now I've seen this happening in India. It happens between state and central, and within states, it happens between the different areas. But they are slowly learning that they need to put their, start thinking in terms of not holistic management, but in terms of silo management, but in terms of holistic management. Everything is related to something else. How do we make sure that everybody is on the same page? Otherwise, we'll be doing things which are actually self-contradictory in what we are setting out to do.
I really appreciate you saying anticipatory thinking and this sort of embedding that into our policies. And I wanted to end with a question from my end, which is what should we anticipate in the coming days from the Iran-Israel-US war?
I think all have to try and bring this war to an end. And it's just not just trying with one of the parties in the war. You can put as much pressure as you like on that party, but that party is not going to succumb because of the way it thinks, as I described it. Uh, Whoever started the war has to acknowledge that, okay, I made a mistake in calculation. Now let's sit down and let's rework this. I don't know how that's happened because the American political scene is pretty fractured itself now. And well, I mean, you come back to the not the elephant, the mastodon in the room is Israel. What do you do with a rogue state like Israel? I mean, Israel is the state which was born out of a Holocaust, and this state becomes the cause of the uh, modern day, today's Holocaust, which is much more severe than what they experienced when they were coming through in the nationhood forming. And the entire world is either helpless or silent. And in that sense, again, I mean, I've seen it. Iran was perhaps the one of the few of, or perhaps the only country which stuck to its gun on the Palestine issue. Everybody else made compromises. They never compromised. Now, you can see that as being stupid inflexibility, or you can interpret that as being a very principled stand, even if it hurts them. And they decided to choose with the principles, even though it hurt them. They did not make compromises, which would have opened up a lot of other things for them. They said no. But in the end, they've been under sanctions for how long? Since 1979, close to 50 years. But in the process, if you look at the growth that Iran has done in the meantime, without the world assisting it or being able to assist it, is phenomenal. They have 100% literacy among men and women. Men and women are almost equal in terms of the component of the population. We hear a lot of stories about how suppressed and oppressed the women are. But my knowledge is that the women are very assertive in Iran. So yes, they were forced by the mullahs to wear the chador, but they were still within the homes, the dominant voice in the family. Or if not the dominant, a very, very important component in family and family decisions. And I've seen actually, I was at a time when public transport was in tatters, not enough. Taxis, the government servants who had cars, they were allowed to use their cars as taxis when they were off duty. And even on duty, if they're going from home to office, these taxis were called mustaqims. So you're going from point A to point B in a straight line. Anyone who wants a ride in between can come in, he pays a price. And so these mustaqim taxis, I've seen one or two women shove their way in where there are already three other males, and the males would, squeeze themselves to make way for the women. The shops, enterprises, they were being run by the women. The pricing, a lot of the women, they were back, but they were saying, hey, no, that's not the price, this is the price. So this is not a society you ignore. This is a society you try and come to terms with and understand. And so right now, I think we have neglected our relations with Bangladesh. And I'm saddened by this. We could have got technology from Iran. They offered to help us to develop our own oil and gas resources because they had developed it already from before the Islamic regime. They had their own oil exploration, gas exploration, gas development, oil development industries themselves. And so, okay, the technology was not the latest state of the art, but it was enough. It enabled them to develop further on it. We have not. I've been learning since early '72 when German geologists came and did the early exploration. that we are floating on oil and gas because it's part of the same shelf coming in from our east and from our northeast. So it has to be there. But since we are closer to the ocean, it's probably very deep down. I was told in 72 that we are rich in coal, but it's very deep down. We don't have the technology that will make it feasible for economically viable for extraction. It was the purest form of coal available, and we did finally get the technology to be able to access that. Technology is evolving, so things become. So we have never gone that route. Why? Because we have been import dependent. This is our biggest malaise in our thinking. Importers find it easy to import because importers are middlemen, and whoever is importing takes 10, 15, 20, depending on how much he can dictate, of the commission, becomes rich, and you, in the process, you sacrifice developing that industry yourself. Let me tell you a very simple story. And I learned this early on. I was Deputy High Commissioner in Calcutta from 84 to 88, in New Delhi from 84 to 88. In 1986, we had Mr. Kurian, who was known as the wizard who turned in the entire India from a milk deficit, egg deficit nation into a milk self-sufficient, egg self-sufficient nation. What is the cheapest and most available form of proteins? It's milk and eggs. And he developed a system by which milk became, you go anywhere in India, you'll see a booth in the community selling milk. He made that available. Now, there was a system he adopted. He had to get the farmers in an area to work together, bring the milk to a certain center. The center would set up an industry which would process it, pasteurize it, and put it in the market. So we persuaded him that, look, why don't you go to Bangladesh to help us? And he came to Bangladesh, spent 7 days, went back, and you know what he said? He was telling the High Commissioner then. He said, Mr. High Commissioner, I don't think you will ever become self-sufficient. I said, why? We don't have enough cows? He said, it's not that. You are hostage to your import lobby. Yes, we had businessmen who were importing milk powder. They were making money, tons out of it. They don't want the milk industry to develop because they will not be able to make money from imports. It's the same with the oil and gas industry. And it's same with probably many other industries. But I know about this. So it's a mindset. We adopted capitalism is good, but we adopted capitalism in its most primitive form, the mercantile capitalism, which basically fueled European colonialism. Okay? But then the Europeans moved away from that. We are stuck there. In our process of evolution, we have not moved forward. Now, what will it take for us to move forward? I don't know.
Thank you so much. Is there anything last thing that you want to touch on regarding capitalism or anything else?
No, but you asked me something and we haven't gone back. Why did the revolution happen? Empire, monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. Now, when did this happen? 1905 is when, before the start of the First World War, great powers are angling and clashing with each other. And you have Imperial Britain expanding, and you also have an ambitious Russia. So Britain and Russia collapsed in the subcontinent also. The great game which was fought between them finally came and became centered in what is now Afghanistan, and Afghanistan it is still being played out in different forms. Iran was more or less divided into two zones. The northern zone, big northern area controlled by the Russians, and the southern zone controlled by the British. And the monarchy, his domain was sort of pushed from both sides and became centered largely just around Tehran and the greater Tehran area. The king, the Qajar emperor, the last of his line, became increasingly hostage to that. And basically, the people started suffering. The perception was that foreign interference, the foreigners had divided Iran into zones, and they were squeezing the emperor for concessions and taking things away. So that sparked off. The Majlis started becoming more powerful. In a sense, you go back the way the parliament in England became, the transition from monarchy to parliament. Uh, uh, Something similar. The story is similar in Iranian context. Then 1905, when the king decided that, okay, I will give the parliament some powers, they will have some say. It continued for some time. And 1925 was the second revolution. Now things are happening around that. The Russian Revolution has already taken place. Turkey is embarking on a sort of revolution. Reza Khan existed at the same time as Kemal Atatürk in Turkey. And Reza Khan's revolution, in a sense, was triggered by what was happening in Turkey. Turkish revolution came, there's a different set of factors, the perception that the monarchy had reached its zenith and foreign powers were splitting it up, the Ottoman Empire. And Reza Khan also wanted to establish a republic, but first he had to take over the throne. He was helped by the British. When the big powers were dominating, the British were already controlling the oil reserves. Britain had discovered oil in that area, in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula and in Persia, around 1905 or around that time. Okay, so they were extracting, they wanted to capitalize on it, and they were doing exactly that. The perception was that whatever oil was being extracted was being siphoned off. The money from it was being siphoned off. So it was triggered by people resenting foreign exploitation of Iran. 1925, it was the same. Now that exploitation had reached the zenith. And the people said, this monarch has sold us down the river. It has to change. The parliament became more and more restive. There was a coup from inside. Now, Reza Khan was a brigadier general in the Cossack brigade because, the Iranian army had people from the Cossacks and as well as from other areas heading different units. He was the brigadier general of the Cossack brigade. He was incited to take over the coup and overthrow the Shah. And I think this was done mainly by the British egging on because they saw the Russian influence was increasing. And so Reza Khan did exactly that. He overthrew the Shah. He was married twice already. He married into the Qajar family. His third wife was from the Qajar family, from whom he has 5 children. Okay. And at that time, when the Shah was overthrown, the Iranian Majlis said that dynasty is finished, the Qajars don't exist anymore. So he set up his own dynasty and he called himself the Pahlavi. Pahlavi, as I said earlier, is the name of the language, the Middle Persian language, which became the dominant Persian language. And he was going back now to perhaps the greatest form of Iranian civilization manifestation, the Sasanian Empire. And basically, he took over. He wanted to, and at this time, Bazaris, the merchants, they came together. The clergy, they came together. The intellectuals, they came together. And they were the driving force for getting the monarch out and having a new order, but they were still not ready for complete republic. So it became a constitutional monarchy. Raza Khan became a constitutional monarch, but he consolidated power, became increasingly dictatorial. There are differences between his ambitions to declare a republic because the clergy were opposed to republicanism. They were also afraid that if he went down that route, he would do what Ataturk had done with the clergy in Turkey. The fundamental change that Ataturk brought about in Turkey was he got rid of the establishment of the clergy. In Iran, the monarchy depended on the clergy supporting it. And this was Shiite clergy. So the clergy remains a dominant force in Iranian politics from the time of the Safavids. And it was during the Safavids that Islam became Shiite Islam. And that's, you have to understand, that's a different dynamic in play. Then in 1950, Parliament kept increasing because of the Raza Khan's authoritarianism and dictatorial ways. He did a lot of modernization. The fundamental basic for modern Iran was set by Raza Khan because he was modernizing. He wanted Iran to become a modern industrialized country. But in the process, he was also being authoritarian and dictatorial and oppressive. So in 1950, a gentleman called Muhammad Musaddiq, he becomes a populist parliamentarian within the parliament. He is not from the aristocracy, but he captures the imagination of the Iranian public who are beginning to hurt by this time. And he says, this Anglo-Iranian oil company is making so much money out of the oil that it gets from Iran. We get nothing. I'm going to nationalize. He was populist. He was nationalist. He nationalized the oil industry. The British hurt most. By extension, the Americans also hurt because this time there was also an American advisor in the court. And he was advising about investments and stuff to do. So basically, a lot of money was going out that way, largely to the British, some to the Americans. And the Mossadegh became prime minister in 1951. British and Americans got together. CIA, basically, it's in the record, CIA and MI6 got together to overthrow Mossadegh. So that was the coup in 1953. And this was, Mossadegh had become a popular leader. In 1953, entire nation was supporting, but the imperial powers were not supporting the regime. That is where you have, I think, perhaps the beginning of what culminated in 1979 and what is happening today. Today's history's roots are not in the immediate last 10 years, and not just in 1979, it goes back to 1951. And this is what most people don't understand history. They don't understand things because history doesn't begin at one point. It's a continuum. It has no starting point and depends on which point you choose, your conclusion will be different. Okay? So Americans choose 1979, so they cannot move out of that. Their predictions and predications are all based on that. Iranians moved from 1953. When the 1979 revolution happened, one of the core aims of the revolution was we will undo what the foreign powers did to us in 1953. That was one of the fundamental precepts of 1979. And yes, why did the 1979 revolution happen? And I saw part of the building of this revolution between 1969 and 1971. When I went to Iran, there was no real political opposition worth the name. Any party which would come out to oppose the Shah was either locked up in prison, executed, or exiled. So they were the communists who were the first to be thrown out because, of course, the Russians and the Americans did not want the Soviet Empire coming into Iran. So they were banned, and Communist Party and the Mujahideen Khalq, another nationalist party, they were banned. They were operating from outside Iran. When I arrived there, they were looting banks to finance themselves. They would come in, have guerrilla raids on the bank, and go away. When the Shah held his obscenely filthy uh, uh, his jashan, celebrating his coronation and assuming that he is a descendant of 2,500 years of Iranian monarchy. That was a celebration of monarchy. Okay? And the people were hurting. That's when the parties outside Iran and most of the parties which came to power during the revolution, they had been outside Iran. There was a gentleman, Bani Sadr, he was a centrist. He was not a communist. He was not a mullah. He was in Paris. Paris, incidentally, became the congregating point of many of the opposition. The only institution that the Shah could not touch, he tried to do that. Khomeini, in fact, was arrested by the Shah, tried on charges of sedition, sentenced to be hanged, and the mullahs came and said, you depended on our support to become, your father depended on our support to become the Shah. You try and hang Khomeini, we will come and hang all of you. That's what happened in the end of the czars in Russia. Okay. And the Shah backed off. Khomeini was allowed to go free and was exiled. He first went to Iraq, to Najaf or Karbala, and then he went to Iran, and that is where everything centered. Now, how do other parties function? It's not that Shah is able to get rid of the parties, the formation of parties. But people, when they heard they have to talk, they would go to the mosques. And he could not touch the mosques. So the mosques became the rallying point and the place where people congregated, and out of 100 people praying, there were 10 people in a corner sitting somewhere and deciding how to get rid of the regime. So when the revolution started, it was a national revolution. I understood that after, because I started delving, talking to people I had known earlier from my days in '69. It brought together the Communist Party on the extreme left, the Tudehs, the nationalists who were fighting Iran insurgency, the Mujahideen Khalq, and they are still fighting. They have leaders, Mahmoud Mousavi and Mariam Mousavi. Mariam Mousavi, incidentally, is a daughter of one of the Qajar kings of that dynasty. Everybody who was against the Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty came together. Bani Sadr came back. He was made the interim president. They had a broad coalition, a national unity government, and their mullahs were also in the cabinet. Now, interestingly, when Khomeini returned from Paris, he returned largely like he got a hero's welcome, largely like Sheikh Mujibur Rahman got the hero's welcome when he came back from Pakistan. I met a journalist whom I had known 15, 20 years earlier. And I was asking, tell me what happened in the revolution? What happened? How did mullahs take over? He said, mullahs did not want to take over. Khomeini landed and people said, now let's go, you take over the palace. He said, no, I'm going to Qom. He said, how can you go to Qom? You led the revolution. He said, no, that is, governance is for the people. I am a man of God. I'm going to Qom. And he actually set off for Qom. Then perhaps, from what I understand of the way Iranians work, they would have talked to each other. This grand unity coalition would have probably sorted things out, come at a compromise, figured out how to re-establish the broken institutions. Iraq attacked. And the minute Iraq attacked Iran, thinking Iran was crippled, fragmented, and weak, you know how Iranians got together? They used three slogans. One, it's Arabs attacking Iranians or Persians. It's Sunni or non-Shias attacking Shias. And it is Western imperialism attacking Iranian nationalism. The governments all along, from the days of 51 when Mossadegh took over, was nationalist. When the Reza Shah established his Pahlavi dynasty, his creed was nationalism. Nationalism has been, and it's Persian nationalism, has been the one unbroken thread from 2,500, 3,000 years ago till today. Every external threat to it has actually made it stronger and more defiant. And so that is what I think we are seeing today. So even within Iran, there may be 10 groups. They may, on their own, be in the majority with forces to the regime. And I would say the regime at least has 30% people of Iran with it. And the remaining are probably scattered. But when they come under an external attack, they will come because they are defending the state. They are defending Iran. Iran, that the national Iran is non-negotiable. And it's the Persian national Iran. So, okay, now where do we go from here? That's all the revolutions are the same. People in society come together. It's a feeling of oppression. It's the youth coming up. I sent you some youth bulk charts, population charts. And you will see in 79, that chart, the youth is the critical factor, something that we are seeing in South Asia today. Youth is the critical factor. But while they're the critical factor, they're still Persians. Okay? And they're still fiercely Persian, they're fiercely nationalist Persians. That is the main thing to remember. And when they come together, they do this. This is what's happening today. Yes, there have been onslaughts on the regime from time to time. You've had several of them. You had a movement by the women coming out demanding greater rights, and actually, until recently, there were photographs and images coming from Iran where you see women in chador, in burqas, or in hijab, and you see women without it. So that is how far the Persianization of the Islamic regime has happened. I described some of it, which I saw when I arrived there. It has gone even further. So it's a live and let live. If the present regime displays Persepolis as the symbol of Iranian nationalism, then you see where the mindset comes from. So, A, I think the world has to come together. B, when I went to Iran, 91, and I have to mention this, I was initially met with aloofness, a standoffish, even some hostility from some of the people I met. So again, I was talking to the same journalist, who told me about Khomeini saying, I have nothing to do with matters of governing the state. I'm a man of God, I'm going to Qom. Well, he said, what happened? When the Iran-Iraq war started, and I had gone there, I had been appointed by Prime Minister Khaleda Zia. It was just shortly after the BNP government had taken over. I went in 91, remember? He said, when the war started, we respected your president, Ziaur Rahman. He was a mediator. He was mediating between us and Iraq. And we thought he was an honest and fair mediator. He was an honest broker. He was not taking sides. We respected him. But then, after he was gone, Your next president, and that was Irshad, he openly took sides, sided with the Iraqis against us. And then that is how I think where the government lost its trust in Bangladeshis, and you're facing part of that. So it took me several months before I was able to break that barrier and say, no, I don't represent the previous regime. I'm coming here. This government has appointed me. I want to build bridges. And there were strong bridges. There were a Bangla program in the Iranian radio. There were Farsi-speaking people who had come here from Iran to here. I'm not sure, I think Bangladesh Betar may have been thinking of setting up some Persian program, but certainly Dhaka University was. But all that, unfortunately, we let it go.